Where are we going with tournaments? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts Think Codes with me, Phil the Glacial Geek. Today, I am going to be talking about a subject which is near and dear to my heart, mostly because of how much I have been missing it and wondering about what's going forward, is the future of tournaments in Warhammer 40K. Most importantly, kind of the thing that kind of spurred me to talk about this is the chapter approved tactical deployment packet that Games Workshop has put out here, which is an entirely new way to play Warhammer 40K, and especially aimed towards tournament play because of a lot of the things that they address and what they talk about it. And I'll be getting into that, and it's not just going to be about that. I'll give you my thoughts about this and my thoughts about tournaments going forward involved with everything that's going on. So let's start getting into it. Just basically the idea of tournaments going forward. Honestly, I don't foresee large-scale tournaments happening until at least, I would say, midway through 2021. I just think that the realities of it. I have tickets to LVO, and I am hoping beyond hope that some kind of miracle occurs and everything settles down and we're back to getting into a more normal situation. And by the time that LVO is supposed to be happening, that things will have settled down and we'll be back into having these large-scale events. But anyone who's been to these large-scale events knows that it's essentially they pack as many nerds into these rooms as they possibly can, and it's a ton of fun. But it's also not exactly the kind of situation that you would want to be in during a global pandemic. I love all of you, but at the same time, I don't want to be, butt rubbing with you in a tournament hall when there's a possibility of a deadly virus rolling around. And I think that masks do a great job of cutting it down. But if you start to put that many people into it, that the percentages that you are talking about, that even at the level that masks are working at, when you start dealing with the percentages that it will be able to handle, and you deal with people trying to maintain that kind of situation, you're not going to be able to have the kind of separation that you really need to make it all effective. And I just don't foresee it happening. But I do foresee it coming back again. I think we'll get back to a place where a combination of getting into vaccines and finding out what happens, and people just generally getting it into a more manageable place. I think we will get to a place where we are going to be able to have these tournaments. And I will be right back in there once it's safe to do again. I did go to a tournament earlier this month up in Charleston, South Carolina. Up for me in Charleston, South Carolina, probably south for most people, especially in the people in the United States. And it was an 8-man tournament. We all had masks on. We kept socially distanced, and it felt okay. But it was, like I said, it was 8-person tournament. It wasn't dealing with 5 or like the almost 800 people that LVO brings in. And I think that those small-scale tournaments you're going to start to see come back. And I mean, they already have, and there's been some smaller GTs that have come back. And I think you'll see some of the smaller events happening, and I think you'll see those start to pick up. But I think big, large-scale tournaments and large-scale events like LVO and Adepticon and Nova Open are going to take a little while to get back. I think that, honestly, I do, as much as it kills me, I think that LVO is probably not going to be happening. If it does, I'll be there. But if it doesn't, we'll have to see. I don't think we're going to be at a place where we can have that. I think that Adepticon is a bit of a bigger maybe. A possibility of having it, I think, is greater. And I think eventually, once you get down into like Nova Open territory at the end of August, I think that's when a bigger event is going to be more plausible to be happening. It would be great if it does to happen, because I would love to get back into it, because I do miss being just surrounded by hundreds of people doing the exact same thing that I do, and being enjoying exactly what I'm doing, and just getting in there, and just the culmination of everyone's hard work and effort coming together, and just having fun, to spend a couple days just being a nerd and just having fun together. So I do think they're going to happen. I think they will be back to them. I don't think that they're gone forever. I do think it's going to be a little while before they start happening. And because the last thing you need is to have a COVID outbreak happen at one of these events and just totally wreck the entire community. I think that if you start having people that get sick from these events, it's going to put a huge damper on it, and far more of a damper on it than just not having it right now and getting back to it when it's safe. Because it shows, I mean, we are a community, and I know that a lot of these big events are where a lot of people make a lot of money from either, that's a big time when a lot of vendors are making their money. I know there's a lot of time when a lot of people get together to push forth their ideas and get together and see people that they want to see. But at the same time, if we put it out that these events happening are more important than the health and well-being of our fellow community members, even if we don't think it's going to be us that's going to happen, but we think that it could be someone else that shows up to them, then I just don't think I think that sets a bad tone. And I think it sets a bad precedent, and it just shows that the community at that point cares less about each of its members and cares more about maintaining the status quo, which I don't think that we ever have been. I think we've all been about making sure that we're doing what's best for all of us as a community. And I want to see that continue, and I want to see that happen. So I think that making the decision to not have these events until it's safe is the right one to make. And I think we will eventually get back to them at some point. But what will those events look like when we get into them eventually happening, or even maybe some of the smaller ones that you have, like the local 8-man one that I have? GW thinks this might be a possibility. So the idea of the tactical deployment mission pack for Chapter Approved mission pack is founded in some sound thinking and some sound logic. How many posts have you seen on Facebook or Reddit or wherever else that you might get your information from, tournament level 40K, about people complaining about the tables, saying that, like, oh, I would have won this game if I wasn't playing on Planet Bowling Ball, or I would have won this game if the board wasn't just packed with 1,000 million different line of sight blocking terrain. It just made it impossible for me to shoot his guys before he got into me. Or look at what this terrain looks like. This is garbage. I can't believe that that this is what we call as passable for a tournament. I've heard so many complaints about terrain at tournaments that I don't think anyone actually loses a game of 40K at tournaments. They only lose because of terrain tables. They've never actually lost themselves. It's the terrain on the table that caused them to lose, or it's the dice of the rolls. It's never them. It's never their loss. It's always something to make an excuse. And what tactical deployment does is answer that very specific issue that people are facing. That they lost the game right from the get-go because the terrain on the table was wrong. Well, now, if the terrain on the table is wrong, it's because you brought it wrong, and you didn't bring what you needed to make sure that you could win. It's essentially about each player brings their own terrain, just like you would your own army, and you deploy it in a specific manner that they have in here. So they have each of the missions come with a map of where you place your objectives, just like you would any other game. But they also come with positions on the map. As you can see here, they have those yellow markers on those. Those other markers are actually terrain markers. That's where you have to place different terrain pieces on there. So you can't just have just a row of your terrain on the back edge of your table there. Everything has to be more than 3 inches from a table edge and more than 3 inches from each other. But there's also specific terrain markers there with when you're deploying your terrain, you have to place them on those markers first before you can place them anywhere else. And it goes back and forth. You know where your deployment's going to be, so you don't have to set it up and then your opponent just flip the script on you. You know where you're going to be. You know where you have to put your pieces of terrain. It also allows you to go into a game knowing that there's going to be at least 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of terrain that you know that are going to be there, that you know how to utilize in your thinking for it. And how much terrain is there is advised is based upon the size of the game, just like the size of the army, the points that they suggest for that. So, for instance, they suggest for combat strike force size game, which is most of the tournaments and stuff that are going to be at 2,000 points there. They say the minimum number of terrain data sheets that you need to bring with you for it is 4. And the maximum number of times each terrain data sheet can be repeated is 3. So you can't just only bring the one type. You have to have at least one other type. So you can have almost all of it, but you have to have at least one other type. So you have to have at least 2 different types of terrain. They have the maximum number of times each critical feature terrain data sheet can be repeated, and these are specific ones. I don't know what they would be because I haven't actually seen any of the cards. I've only seen the one that they have, the example that they have in the book here. But I guess certain features, certain terrain pieces are going to have critical features, and each one can only be in your list once. So if your opponent brings it, they can bring it. That's fine, but you can only have it in your list there. And then there's a minimum terrain points and there's a maximum terrain points, and you have to bring it. So if you are looking to have a gunline army, you're probably going to want to bring the minimum amount of terrain necessary to do it. So you'd have to have the minimum number of terrain pieces. So you'd have 4 terrain pieces, and they would have to add up to 150 points of terrain pieces versus a maximum terrain of 200. So everyone's got to have between 150 and 200 based upon a 2,000 point game that you're going to have at a tournament there. And then you have to place them in specific places, and then you have some other regulations that go along. And you basically deploy them back and forth just like you would deploying an army. Again, this answers a lot of questions a lot of problems that people have had where, the tournament just didn't have the ability to bring all the terrain that they needed for a game or for a tournament. Now, if they just have the people coming to agree to come, they have to come with their own terrain. So you don't have that issue. You also have it where people don't complain about, it's like I lost because of the table that I was assigned, or I lost because of the terrain that was on the table. And, I've heard that 1,000 times from 1,000 different people, and not even just from people who complain all the time. I've heard it from people who, they just legitimately feel like they lost because of the terrain on the board. And well, now there's no excuse for that. And a lot of the answers that this type of gameplay produce are derived from issues that have arisen in the competitive scene, and a lot of the answers that they are making solve those problems that they have. And I think that it's along the same lines that GW has been traveling with 8th and 9th edition, is that they see these problems that have arisen, they see the kind of quarrels that people make, they see the issues that come up with hundreds of comments on a single post because of, and they've answered them. And they've answered them with either the gameplay mechanics, they've answered them with changing the points levels, or they've answered them now, in this case, with coming up with a different gameplay mechanic that allows you to avoid those problems in the first place. So I think it's a great idea. As a concept, I think it is a great idea. And the tournament that I just played in September did a similar kind of thing where you essentially had a bunch of different terrain in boxes. So there was different terrain sets, so different tables of terrain that they had that were in boxes. And what would happen is that based upon where you were on the which table you were at, you could go up and choose a box of terrain. You and your opponent agree which box of terrain you do, and then you did the same thing back and forth, placing terrain around the table so that you were happy with the way that the battlefield was laid out. And you didn't have to bring your own terrain, which was nice, which I'll get to in a second. But it also allowed you to set up the table so that you didn't feel like you were being left out. You didn't feel like because of the setup that you were at a disadvantage, because you were placing it along with your opponent based upon a preset amount of pieces that you put down there, and you could set it up the terrain so that now you knew that at the end of the day, if the terrain was set up poorly and that's why you lost, it was your fault. And I have no one else to blame, and no one was complaining about it. I liked it a lot. And what they would do is the top tables had the first choice of boxes. So if there was a box that, if it was a box that was more preferable to the mechanics. So there was one box that had like the pro tabletop terrain there, and the top table often took that one because they were like, it makes it easier. Because at that point, the people who are going up there are going to be more competitive, and they're going to be more likely to want to have like that. Whereas people who want more thematic, or maybe, are probably going to be, lower down there if they're just there for the experience and they're not there for trying to win and bring, whatever else they can. They're going to have terrain boards, the boards of terrain and pieces of terrain that they're more happy with, that they think look better. And I think that's great. It worked really well, the setting up, and then you had less people complaining about the board setup. You don't have the TOs getting yelled at or being, talked down to because of how the boards were set up. And, you just add a 15-minute period in front of each game that you have the board set up that you have to get done there. So it worked really well, and I thought it was really fun. And it makes the idea of this feasible in my mind, because it was done and you were able to do it. It took an extra 15 minutes, maybe, if that, before each round, and you could do it, and it worked out really well. and made it a lot of fun. So I could see if you had this kind of requirement and you had the same kind of painting requirements for the terrain that you do for models at tournaments, it's going to look fine. You know what I mean? It's not going to look, super thematic each table because you're going to have two people bringing two sets of terrain. But at the same time, it'll look good. You'll have painted terrain because that's one of the things that you make a requirement of. And it gives an opportunity for more people that are there for the hobby to show off even more by bringing in these cool looking terrain pieces. So as I said, as a theory, as a concept, I love this idea. And I love that GW is thinking kind of outside the box, because who would have thought that would be a thing that you would do? I know they offer a lot of terrain kits and things like that, but at the same time, you wouldn't think that making a gameplay mechanic of bringing your own terrain would be something that you would think about. I know they've been having a lot more of the themed terrain mechanics, like the siege drill for GSC, or you have like the mech shop for the orcs, and what's the one for the sisters? I can't remember, the basilicum or something like that. They're not the basilicum. I can't remember what it is, but it's the one with the statue. And I know they've been doing those themed terrain pieces for actual armies, but at the same time, you never really thought of it as being part of the gameplay mechanic of building an army and building the terrain to go with that force that you would show up to a game with. So I think that's a cool idea that they thought outside the box for, to answer an issue that has arisen in the community. But do I think that this chapter-approved tactical deployment is going to replace a usual tournament play where the tournament brings its own terrain, has its own board set up, and any of that? No. And the big reason I don't think it's going to happen, I think you could have it in smaller ones, especially if you have a smaller local tournament where people know what's going on and they know what the expectation is and they can work together to make it happen. The smaller you have it, the more likely I think this would be feasible. But the larger you get, the more you have people traveling, the less feasible this becomes. Because, anyone who's traveled to any kind of tournament outside of their general region, that's had to take a plane to get somewhere, that's had to do something like that, knows that traveling with your army alone can be difficult, let alone trying to then carry half a table's worth of terrain with you as well. It's difficult to just the feasibility of trying to ask everyone who's going to fly to Las Vegas to bring half a table's worth of terrain with them becomes difficult to do. It becomes infeasible to make that kind of expectation of people that are traveling already for a tournament. So I don't think that big tournaments are going to be doing this, as much as the big tournaments are the ones that would benefit most from having this kind of thing, just because of the expectation that it would place on the players becomes a bit much. But I could be wrong, because there have been a lot of people that thought painting expectations were too much, and now it's become part of like the base core mechanic of the game. So who knows? I could see tournaments trying this. I could see tournaments giving it a shot at the end of the day. I could also see bigger tournaments having a tactical deployment tournament as well as a grand tournament, on the side, sort of like how they have like kill team tournaments or narrative tournaments or anything like that they have the game days that go along with it. I could see them doing something like this on the side as an extra option. So like at Nova Open, you'll have the GT, you'll have the Age of Sigmar, you'll have the kill team, you'll have all those different things, and then you'll also have a tactical deployment tournament that you can buy tickets to and go to if you want to try to do that, if you want to have it, if you like the idea, because I think the idea is solid. It's super solid, and the mechanics of it seem really cool. The main missions play just like 9th edition missions, except that they have the added difference of secondaries that you can choose that play off of tactical deployment stuff. So you have some, and it's basically each subsect of the mission of the secondaries that you can choose from. There's an added one in there that encompasses the tactical deployment gameplay mechanics. So you have one of some of them will have a secondary that will be, you get points for destroying buildings. You'll have other ones that say you'll get tactical deployment. You get points for psychic imprint, so you get so for instance, you've got here under Warcraft here you have psychic imprint. Score 2 victory points at the end of the battle round if one or more units from your army successfully completed the following psychic action, and the psychic action requires you to do it on you basically scanning a piece of terrain. They have other ones where demolition charges for shadow operations, where you're blowing up different things. You have some where it's like you get points for destroying buildings. You have other ones for holding stronghold denial. So score 5 victory points if you at the end of the battle for each enemy building that you destroyed. And then you have targeted destruction and no mercy, no respite, which is score 4 victory points at the end of the battle round for each enemy unit that destroyed that battle round while it was within 3 inches of a critical feature terrain. So all those different things where you have it, where you can bring it and you can have an idea. So you have a gameplay where you're like, all right, I'm going to have this cool piece with a critical terrain feature that I'm going to place in the middle of the board that I know is going to be a place that my opponent's going to have to go towards, and they'll be on there. And if I can destroy his units, I'll take that secondary, and I know I can get points because he's going to have to keep going there if he wants to keep up with me on primaries. And if he doesn't do that, then I'm at an advantage anyway on primaries that I'm going to be going forward. So the mechanics of it are well thought out. I think they're well established. I just don't think that there's the feasibility of it for tournaments is really going to be something that I think you're going to see happen. Because the other issue with it is that the data terrain feature cards that they have and the points that they have are only going to be the ones for the official gameplay for the official GW scenery. So there's nothing in there about making your own data cards based upon your own scenery that you build. You would have to find ways to get the data cards for a specific scenery piece and then build a terrain piece if you didn't want to use their official one that is similar enough to it that it fits all the requirements, all the requirements of those specific things. And then it becomes a bit more of a headache there, like trying to determine proxies and things like that you have already with miniatures. So then add on top of this, doing it with terrain, I think would be very difficult to do. And some of the bigger, like LVO being run by Frontline Gaming, they have their own business in selling terrain. So I don't think that they're going to be too interested in making it so that only GW terrain can show up at their tournaments. It's going to be tough. So I think that there are some logistical issues that would keep this chapter-proof tactical deployment from becoming the norm, but I could see it being used in a smaller environment where there's an understanding with the players, or being an optional thing for a bigger tournament such as LVO or Nova or something like that, where they have a tactical deployment tournament as well as an option for the general GT tournaments. So I don't think this is going to be the change. I don't think you need to worry about the sky falling just yet. I think most tournaments going forward are still going to be your normal tournaments, but this kind of thinking and this kind of thinking outside the box about ways to answer the problems that the community has seen, I think is a good sign from GW. And I think that it kind of follows along with everything that GW has been doing so far, being more responsive to the community, listening to the community and seeing what the problems are and trying to address them. And whether they address them perfectly every single time, I don't think is the big takeaway. I don't think that this book in and of itself being the end-all be-all answer for things, that kind of expectation, I think, is it really sells short the fact that they took this effort, that it was all thought out, it was well thought out, and it was well reasoned, and it gave you a system that would work. This absolutely would work. It's just a matter of logistics that I think will keep it from becoming the agreed upon standard that everything works out. Because, basic 9th edition now, I think, created missions that going forward, all of the tournaments are going to follow. So the grand tournament pack that they came out with, I think that is going to be the basis for grand tournaments going forward. I don't think you're going to see bespoke missions for the tournaments. I don't think LVO is going to come out with bespoke missions. I think they're going to be like, bring your grand tournament pack and you'll know the missions that we're going to be playing. And we'll tell you which ones we're going to play at the day of or beforehand or however they want to handle it. They'll let you know that which ones they're going to do, but it's going to be out of that book. I think the same thing is going to happen at Adepticon. I think the same thing is going to happen at Nova. And Nova, Nova for a long time was very, held themselves to the standard where they made their own missions. That's what they did. But I think what GW did was look at all of the things that were popular out there with different ways of doing missions, such as the secondaries and on the primaries and all these different things. And they created a system that works very well. And I'm very happy with the way 9th edition missions play. I think the fact that you are no longer just incentivized to just kill everything. I think the fact that you are no longer, that you need to be able to hold objectives, that you need to be able to score secondaries, that you need to be able to move around, that it's not just helpful to have this gun line where you sit and castle in a corner and shoot everyone to death and expect to win. There's no longer cheesing with, like the relic, where it was just like there was that one objective, and if your opponent jumped on it, there's not much you could do about it. Nowadays, I think it works out well. I think that there's risk in taking an elite army that can really punch hard, but if they don't have the board control, they're going to have a hard time winning in 9th edition. And I think the same thing goes the opposite way, where you have 1,000 different Gribblies, but if they can't hold on to an objective until your turn, it doesn't do you any good. There's enough DAC out there that you can kill things off. But to answer some of those questions, the fact that they've changed morale now, that I think I honestly think it benefits Horde armies more so than elite armies, because failing by one with your elite army because of your high leadership, you would lose one model maybe back in last edition. Now, once you fail that morale test, you can now lose the entire block. If you roll really horribly, is gone. But at the same time, the odds of even a Grot squad, if they lose guys, if you lose that morale by like 15, it doesn't make a difference, because you still have the ability then to not roll ones and make the rest of the force leave. One's gonna go, but the rest of them can stick around. And if you roll that one, there's always that chance now. You don't auto-fail. You never auto-fail a morale test anymore. You can always roll that one and just stick it and just be like, heck yeah. So I think that the changes that they've made in 9th edition to the gameplay of the game itself holds itself as an option, as an opportunity to unify the competitive scene around the world. Honestly, I think that most tournaments now are going to be using the bespoke GW missions, and they're not going to be making their own because they don't need to anymore. There's no inherent imbalance in any of these missions. I think that there are secondaries that are easier to do and accomplish. I think there are armies that do well at different things. But at the same time, I don't think any army is at a disadvantage right off the bat when you go into a 9th edition game anymore. You can talk about game balance, and I think we'll see what happens going forward here. I think that I think once this goes out, you'll see in like a day or two, or like 3 days or something like that, you're going to see the first codexes for 9th edition come out, and I think you're going to see some balance changes that were intended with the way that they've changed the whole game. So it'll be interesting to see how that all comes out. I think that 8th edition was a big reset on the way things had been going forward from 4th, 5th, and 6th and 7th. I think they just did the full hard reset on it, and then gave that as an opportunity to then go, all right, well, let's see what works with this hard reset, and then going forward, we're going to change things. We're going to go forward in a way that is productive and build upon it, and I think 9th edition has done that. So honestly, I think we will get back into gaming eventually after all of this stuff kind of settles itself out. I think that we will get back into a world where there's going to be a whole lot of competitive gaming and ways for us to just knock our hard-nosed list into each other. And I think that they are going to be following the Games Workshop missions that they had that came out in the Grand Tournament Pack, 2020. I like the idea of GW thinking outside the box and trying different things like this. I don't think this is going to become the standard, but the fact that they are thinking outside the box with this, I think, shows good promise for things going forward for competitive players and players in general. The fact that they now have bespoke rules and different ways of setting things up for everything from combat patrol games up to onslaught missions, I think is great. And the fact that the missions themselves are geared towards those larger or smaller games is fantastic. And they have all of them in here too. So you can have combat patrol missions that are, tactical deployment. You can have onslaught missions that would be ridiculous. Onslaught missions that you can have that are going to be that can be tactical deployment. And I think going forward, the fact that they give all these options means that they are listening to the community, what the community wants to see, and they're making things different. So nowadays, I've been playing a lot of 1,000-point games, and a 1,000-point game now feels unique in and of itself, and it feels like an entity unto itself. It doesn't feel like you're playing a small game of 40K. It feels like you're playing your own kind of game. And I love that. I love that they've decided to do that. So, yeah, that's my ideas. I think we're going forward. We're going to see a more unified tournament scene out there. I think you're going to see GW listening to what the community wants and responding to what the community wants. And at the end of the day, I think it's all going to be good for the players going forward. Once we all can finally get back to meeting each other in large groups of stinky nerds. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. Let me know down below what you think about it, what you think the future is going to be, and what you look forward to finally being able to do once we can get out of our apartments and meet up in large groups again. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I certainly have. I have been Phil, the Glacial Geek as always, and until next time, stay safe and have fun.